It is the 18th of July, 1967. We find ourselves tracing a thin line across the map of central Alaska, where a mountain known to the Koyukon people as Denali, the High One, rises 20,310 feet above sea level, its white summit disappearing into clouds that have not parted for 3 days. On this particular evening, 12 young climbers from the Joseph Wilcox Expedition shelter in small tents at 17,900 feet. Their radio transmissions have grown faint. Below them, park rangers note barometric readings that suggest an approaching system of unusual intensity. And somewhere above the clouds, 7 members of their party have begun a summit attempt from which they will not return. In the next few minutes, we will move gently through this story together. By minute 2, we will stand at the base of this great mountain as the expedition first arrives in Alaska. By minute 4, we will ascend alongside these climbers through the early camps, understanding the rhythm of high-altitude travel. And by minute 6, we will settle into the quiet tension of a base camp evening, where the weather begins its slow and fateful turn. Tonight, we trace the path of those who walked into the white silence of Denali's upper slopes during the summer of 1967. This is a story of preparation and ambition, of weather systems beyond prediction, and of the thin line between triumph and stillness on the highest peak in North America. Let us begin where all such journeys begin, with a map, a dream, and the long road north. Before we begin our journey into the high places of Alaska, let us take a moment to acknowledge the nature of the story we are about to share. This is a true account of 12 climbers who ventured onto North America's highest peak in the summer of 1967. 7 of these climbers did not return from the mountain's upper slopes, and we will speak of them with the respect and dignity they deserve. If you are settling in for rest, know that this narration moves at a gentle pace. There are no sudden sounds to disturb you, no alarming moments designed to startle. We tell this story not to sensationalize, but to remember, to honor those who walked into the white silence and to understand as best we can what the mountain asked of them. Let us settle in together, finding a comfortable place as we begin this quiet journey through history. It is the winter of 1966, and we find ourselves tracing a line across the map of central Alaska. Here, where the Alaska Range curves like a spine through the territory's interior, one peak rises above all others. The Koyukon Athabascan people have long called it Denali, the High One, and even on paper, rendered in the fine contour lines of a topographic survey, the mountain seems to command attention. 20,310 feet above the level of the sea, its summit punctures the sky at a latitude so far north that its effective altitude, measured by the thinness of the air, rivals peaks far taller on other continents. In a modest home somewhere in the American heartland, a young man named Joseph Wilcox spreads just such a map across his kitchen table. The lamp above casts a warm circle of light onto the paper, and Wilcox leans close, his finger tracing the route that has occupied his imagination for months. He is in his mid-20s, a graduate student with a methodical mind and a passion for the high places of the world. Like many young Americans of his generation, he has been drawn to mountaineering at a time when the sport is experiencing a quiet renaissance. The 1960s have brought a new wave of climbers to the Great Peaks. The successful American ascent of Everest in 1963 has captured the national imagination, and magazines dedicated to outdoor pursuits fill their pages with accounts of expeditions to remote summits. For those who dream of testing themselves against the mountains, this is an era of possibility. And for Joseph Wilcox, no peak calls more insistently than McKinley, the name by which most Americans still know Denali in this decade. There is something about this particular mountain that sets it apart. While not the tallest peak on Earth, McKinley presents challenges that few other mountains can match. Its northern latitude means that climbers encounter Arctic conditions even in summer. Its massive bulk rises nearly 18,000 feet from the surrounding lowlands, a vertical gain unmatched by almost any other mountain on the planet when measured from base to summit. And its weather. The weather is the great unknown, the variable that no amount of planning can fully anticipate. Wilcox understands these challenges, at least as well as any climber can understand them from a distance. He has studied the accounts of previous expeditions, noting the patterns of success and difficulty that emerge from the historical record. He has read of the first successful ascent by Hudson Stuck and his party in 1913, following the long approach up the Muldrow Glacier. He has absorbed the lessons offered by those who came after, each expedition adding to the collective knowledge of what the mountain demands. Now, in the quiet of his home, with winter darkness pressing against the windows, Wilcox begins the work of transforming his dream into a plan. He drafts letters to potential team members, each one carefully worded to convey both the seriousness of the undertaking and the opportunity it represents. He seeks climbers with experience, with the physical conditioning necessary for high-altitude work, and with the temperament to function as part of a team under demanding conditions. The responses arrive over the following weeks, carried by the Postal Service from various corners of the country. Each letter represents another person willing to commit months of preparation and significant personal resources to the pursuit of a shared goal. The expedition begins to take shape, not as an abstract possibility, but as a concrete undertaking with names and faces and individual stories. The cost of such an expedition is not trivial. Equipment must be purchased or borrowed. Transportation to Alaska must be arranged. Food supplies must be calculated and procured. Permits must be obtained from the National Park Service, which administers Mount McKinley National Park. Each detail requires attention, and Wilcox approaches the planning with the systematic care of someone who understands that success in the mountains often depends on the quality of preparation in the valleys below. As spring approaches and the days lengthen toward the Alaskan summer, the expedition roster solidifies. Wilcox will lead a group of 9 climbers, most of them young men in their 20s and 30s, drawn from various walks of life, but united by their desire to stand on the highest point in North America. What is it about high and distant places that calls to certain souls? What dreams pull us toward challenges that others might never understand? And then, as so often happens in the world of mountaineering, another group enters the picture. A separate expedition from Colorado, led by Howard Snyder, has also received permission to climb McKinley during the same summer season. The National Park Service, seeking to reduce the number of independent parties on the mountain, suggests that the two groups combine their efforts. After some discussion, an agreement is reached. The Colorado climbers, Snyder, Paul Schlichter, and Jerry Lewis, will join forces with the Wilcox Expedition, bringing the total number of climbers to 12. It is a decision born of practical considerations, and it is a decision that will be examined and re-examined in the years to come. But in these months of preparation, as maps are studied and equipment lists are refined, no one can foresee what awaits on the upper slopes. The future remains hidden, as futures always are, behind the veil of time and weather, and the thousand small choices that lead human beings toward their various fates. We pause here for a moment, letting the weight of anticipation settle like snow upon a windless ridge. Let us come to know them now, these 12 who answered the mountain's call. They are not famous men. They are not celebrities or public figures. They are ordinary Americans of the 1960s, distinguished only by their willingness to attempt something extraordinary. And it is precisely their ordinariness that makes their story worth remembering, for they represent the quiet courage that lives in countless human hearts, the impulse to reach beyond the familiar toward something greater. Joseph Wilcox, the expedition leader, brings to the mountain a careful and organized mind. He is a man who believes in preparation, in the value of detailed planning, in the importance of anticipating problems before they arise. His letters and documents from this period reveal someone who takes his responsibilities seriously, who understands that leading others into a demanding environment carries obligations that extend beyond his own safety and success. Jerry Clark is among those who will join the expedition, a man whose background and temperament add to the diversity of the group. Like the others, he has his own reasons for wanting to stand on that distant summit, his own private calculus of risk and reward that has led him to commit to this undertaking. Dennis Luchterhand brings his own experiences and aspirations to the team. In the photographs that survive from this era, we see a young man whose face reflects the particular blend of confidence and uncertainty that characterizes those on the threshold of great endeavors. He has prepared as best he can. He has trained his body and gathered his equipment and said his goodbyes to those who will wait for his return. Mark McLaughlin, whose name will later be spoken with quiet reverence by those who remember this expedition, joins the group with his own dreams of the summit. The details of his daily life, his work, his relationships, his small pleasures and private concerns are the details that make up any human existence. He is someone's son, someone's friend, someone whose absence will leave a particular shape of grief in the world. John Russell, Walt Taylor, and Steve Taylor, these names too must be spoken, for they represent lives lived and hopes cherished. Each man has walked his own path to this moment, making decisions large and small that have brought him to the roster of the Wilcox Expedition. Each carries with him the weight of his own history and the lightness of his own expectations. Anshel Skiff rounds out the Wilcox contingent, another individual whose presence adds to the human complexity of the group. In any expedition of this size, personalities must find ways to accommodate one another. Strengths must be recognized and deployed. Weaknesses must be understood and compensated for. The success of the whole depends on the willingness of each member to subordinate personal preferences to collective needs. And then there are the three from Colorado: Howard Snyder, Paul Schlichter, and Jerry Lewis. They come to the combined expedition with their own dynamics already established, their own patterns of communication and cooperation developed through previous climbs together. The merger of the two groups creates a new social organism, one that must find its balance even as it moves toward the mountain. Snyder, in particular, will play a significant role in the story that unfolds. As the leader of the Colorado contingent, he occupies a position that is neither fully subordinate to Wilcox nor entirely independent. The relationship between the two groups, cooperative in intent but not without its tensions, will be one of the factors examined in the aftermath of what is to come. These, then, are the 12. They range in age from their early 20s to their 30s. They come from various states and various backgrounds. Some have more climbing experience than others. Some are more comfortable with risk. Some are natural leaders while others prefer to follow. They are, in short, a group of human beings, complex, individual, and irreducible to simple categories. What unites them is simpler than their differences. They share a willingness to test themselves against one of the most demanding environments on Earth. They share a belief that the effort is worthwhile, that the summit of McKinley represents something worth pursuing despite the costs and dangers. And they share, whether they know it or not, a fate that awaits them on the high slopes of the mountain they have chosen to climb. Do you believe the mountain chooses those who walk upon it, or do we choose our own paths, unaware of where they lead? In the weeks before departure, final preparations occupy their days. Equipment is checked and rechecked. Physical conditioning continues. Letters are written to family members, some of them containing words that will later be read with different eyes. The ordinary business of life, bills to pay, arrangements to make, responsibilities to delegate, must be attended to before the extraordinary business of the mountain can begin. And through it all, the image of Denali hovers in their minds, white and massive, patient and indifferent, waiting as it has waited for millennia for those who would attempt its slopes. The mountain does not call to them, not really. Mountains do not speak or beckon or care. But something within these 12 men responds to the mountain's presence in the world, some resonance between the landscape of rock and ice and the interior landscape of human aspiration. These are the names we carry forward, 12 souls preparing to walk together into the white unknown. The journey to Alaska unfolds across the long miles of the American and Canadian landscape, a gradual transition from the familiar to the remote. For the members of the Wilcox Expedition, this northward travel is itself a kind of preparation, a slow leaving behind of the ordinary world, and an equally slow approach to the extraordinary one that awaits. Some of the climbers drive, their vehicles loaded with equipment and supplies, following the ribbon of highway that stretches from the lower 48 through the vast spaces of Western Canada. The Alaska Highway, built during the Second World War to connect the territory to the continental road network, offers mile after mile of wilderness punctuated by small settlements and fuel stops. The landscape changes as they travel north, forests giving way to broader vistas, familiar species of trees replaced by the hardy varieties that survive in colder climates. Others fly, watching from aircraft windows as the geography below transforms into something wilder and less tamed. From the air, the scale of the land becomes apparent in ways that ground travel cannot quite convey. Rivers wind through valleys that have never known permanent human settlement. Mountains rise in ranges that extend to every horizon. And somewhere ahead, still hidden by distance and weather, Denali waits. The members of the expedition converge on Alaska in the middle of June, 1967. Summer has come to the north, bringing with it the long days for which these latitudes are famous. The sun barely sets, circling the sky in a shallow arc that provides light for 20 or more hours each day. For climbers, this extended daylight is a gift, allowing for flexible scheduling and the possibility of travel at hours that would be impossible in more southerly regions. Mount McKinley National Park, established in 1917, encompasses the mountain and its surrounding wilderness. The park headquarters, located near the entrance, serves as the administrative center for all climbing activities on the peak. Here, expedition members must present themselves, submit their plans, and demonstrate that they have the experience and equipment necessary for a safe attempt on the mountain. The rangers who staff these offices have seen many expeditions come and go. They have witnessed successes and failures, summit celebrations and rescue operations, the full range of human experience that the mountain generates. Their job is to assess the readiness of each climbing party, to provide what guidance and information they can, and to monitor the progress of expeditions once they are on the mountain. In 1967, the tools available for this monitoring are limited: radio communication, weather observations, and the reports of other climbers. But the rangers do what they can with what they have. The Wilcox Expedition presents itself for review and receives the necessary permits. The rangers note the size of the group, the experience levels of its members, and the planned route of ascent. There are conversations about weather patterns, about the conditions that have been observed on the mountain in recent weeks, about the particular challenges that this summer might present. The climbers listen, absorb what information they can, and prepare for the next phase of their journey. From the park entrance, the expedition must still cover many miles to reach the base of their chosen route. The Muldrow Glacier, which they will follow toward the upper mountain, begins on the north side of the peak, accessible via a long approach through the wilderness. This approach is itself a significant undertaking, requiring several days of travel through terrain that is beautiful but demanding. The first views of Denali from within the park are revelatory. The mountain dominates the landscape in a way that photographs cannot adequately capture. Its sheer mass, the sweep of its glaciers, the distant gleam of its snow-covered summit, all of this combines to create an impression of something almost beyond human scale. The climbers who will attempt its slopes must reckon with this reality, must somehow reconcile their human ambitions with the mountain's inhuman indifference. As the expedition makes its way toward the Muldrow Glacier, the routines of wilderness travel establish themselves. Each day brings its own challenges: stream crossings, route finding through unfamiliar terrain, the management of heavy loads across ground that is sometimes firm and sometimes treacherous. The climbers learn to work together, to adjust their pace to the needs of the group, to share the burdens of the journey in ways that will become essential as they move higher. The weather during this approach is generally cooperative, offering the mild conditions that June in Alaska can sometimes provide. But even in these lower elevations, the presence of the mountain makes itself felt. Clouds form and dissipate around the high peaks. The temperature drops when the sun is obscured, and always, somewhere above, the summit remains hidden or revealed according to the whims of the atmosphere. The base of the Muldrow Glacier, when they finally reach it, marks a transition. Behind them lies the tundra and the willows, the ground-level world of vegetation and running water. Ahead lies the world of ice, where the rules of travel change and the environment becomes fundamentally different. From this point forward, the climbers will be living on frozen water, navigating a landscape that shifts and cracks according to its own slow logic. And so they arrive, as all travelers arrive, tired, hopeful, and standing at the threshold of something vast. The Muldrow Glacier stretches before them like a highway of ice, winding between the ridges that define its course toward the heart of the Alaska Range. For the members of the Wilcox Expedition, stepping onto the glacier is a moment of commitment, a crossing of the threshold between the world of solid ground and the world of frozen rivers that flow imperceptibly toward the valleys below. Glacier travel requires its own techniques and its own discipline. The surface that appears solid may conceal crevasses, deep fractures in the ice that can swallow a climber without warning. These crevasses form as the glacier moves, the ice stretching and cracking in response to the stresses of its own motion. In summer, when snow covers the upper layers of the glacier, these fractures become invisible, hidden beneath bridges of consolidated snow that may or may not support a human weight. The protection against crevasse falls is the rope. Climbers traveling on glaciated terrain tie themselves together at intervals, so that if one person breaks through a snow bridge, the others can arrest the fall and effect a rescue. This technique, fundamental to glacier travel, transforms a group of individuals into a linked unit, each person's safety depending on the alertness and skill of the others. The Wilcox Expedition moves onto the Muldrow in rope teams, maintaining the spacing and tension that the technique requires. The first steps onto the ice are tentative, each climber testing the surface, learning to read the subtle signs that might indicate a hidden crevasse. With experience, the eye learns to detect the slight depressions, the faint discolorations, that suggest weakness in the snow. But experience is a teacher that requires time, and the members of this expedition are still learning. The pace of glacier travel is necessarily slow. Each step must be placed with care. The rope between climbers must be managed to avoid tangles while maintaining the tension necessary for arrest. Rest breaks must be taken in locations where the snow is demonstrably solid, and always the awareness of what lies beneath, the blue depths of the ice, the vertical walls of the crevasses, the cold air that rises from the fractures, provides a constant reminder of the environment's hazards. The sound of the glacier is distinctive. There is the soft crunch of boots on snow, the occasional creak of ice adjusting to its own stresses, the whisper of wind across the frozen surface. At night, when the climbers lie in their tents, they sometimes hear the deeper sounds of the glacier's movement, groans and cracks that seem to come from the very heart of the ice. These sounds are normal, the glacier's way of speaking as it flows, but for those unaccustomed to the environment, they can be unsettling. The expedition establishes its first camps on the lower glacier, the members working together to prepare platforms for their tents. The process involves stamping down the snow to create a firm base, sometimes digging away softer layers to reach more consolidated material beneath. The tents themselves are anchored with ice axes and snow stakes, secured against the winds that can arise with little warning in this exposed environment. Life on the glacier quickly develops its own rhythms. Mornings begin with the lighting of stoves, the melting of snow for water, the preparation of simple meals that provide the calories necessary for the day's work. The expedition carries food carefully calculated to meet the energy demands of high-altitude climbing, dense calories in portable forms, supplemented by hot drinks that provide both warmth and hydration. The days are spent moving loads up the glacier, a process known as ferrying. Because climbers cannot carry all their equipment and supplies in a single trip, they must make multiple journeys, carrying a portion of their loads to a higher camp, descending to retrieve more, and repeating the process until everything necessary has been moved upward. This ferrying is tedious work, but it is essential to the logistics of the climb. As the expedition progresses up the Muldrow, the terrain changes. The lower glacier gives way to steeper sections where the ice is more broken, requiring careful navigation through ice falls and around crevasse fields. The views expand as elevation is gained, the surrounding peaks coming into clearer perspective, the scale of the Alaska Range revealing itself in its full magnitude. The climbers grow accustomed to their environment, developing the instinctive responses that glacier travel requires. They learn to move efficiently on the rope, to read the snow surface for signs of danger, to conserve their energy for the long days of work ahead. They learn, too, to live with the constant cold that characterizes even summer in these elevations. The cold that creeps into fingers and toes, that makes every task more difficult, that is never entirely absent even in the warmest hours. Above them, visible now from certain angles, the upper mountain rises toward its summit. The route they will follow continues up the glacier, then ascends to a series of high camps before the final push to the top. Each camp represents a step upward, a stage in the acclimatization process that will prepare their bodies for the thin air of the summit zone. And each camp brings them closer to the weather that rules the upper mountain, weather that is already, in these early days of the expedition, beginning to gather its forces for what is to come. The lanterns that the climbers carry begin to serve a new purpose as the expedition progresses. Though the summer sun provides light for most of the day, there are hours when the light dims, when the shadows lengthen across the glacier, when the lantern's glow becomes a comfort against the immensity of the frozen landscape. These small circles of light, portable and warm, represent the human presence in a place that is fundamentally inhospitable to human life. The glacier holds its own kind of silence, deep and patient, as if the ice itself were listening. The camps that climbers build on high mountains are temporary dwellings, structures of fabric and intention raised against the elements. For the members of the Wilcox Expedition, each camp becomes a home for the hours or days they occupy it, a place of rest and preparation, of meals shared and plans discussed, of sleep stolen from the demanding environment. The process of establishing a camp begins with the selection of a site. The ideal location offers protection from wind, freedom from obvious avalanche or crevasse hazards, and a surface that can be prepared as a platform for tents. On the glacier, this often means seeking out relatively flat areas where the snow is firm and the exposure is minimized. The climbers develop an eye for these sites, learning to read the terrain for the features that will make a camp viable. Once a site is selected, the work of preparation begins. Snow must be stamped down or shoveled to create a level platform. In some cases, snow blocks are cut and stacked to form walls that will protect the tents from wind. These walls are not decorative. They are functional necessities, capable of making the difference between a restful night and a desperate struggle against the elements. The tents of the 1960s are simpler than their modern counterparts, but fundamentally similar in purpose. They provide a barrier against wind and precipitation, a space where climbers can escape the direct assault of the weather. Inside, sleeping bags and pads create zones of warmth, precious islands of comfort in an otherwise frigid environment. The careful management of this warmth, the preservation of dry clothing, the maintenance of adequate insulation, is essential to the well-being of everyone on the expedition. The cooking systems that the climbers employ are based on small stoves fueled by white gas or similar fuels. These stoves, temperamental at altitude where reduced oxygen can affect combustion, require patience and skill to operate effectively. The climbers learn to shelter the stoves from wind, to manage the fuel supply carefully, to melt snow in quantities sufficient for drinking and cooking without wasting precious resources. Water is one of the constant needs of high-altitude climbing. The air at elevation is dry, and exertion accelerates dehydration. But water does not exist in liquid form on the upper mountain. It must be created by melting snow, a process that consumes both fuel and time. The climbers establish routines for water production, designating responsibilities and timing, ensuring that sufficient water is available for the needs of the group. Meals in the camps are simple but essential. The climbers consume dried foods, preserved meats, crackers, cheese, chocolate, and other items selected for their caloric density and ease of preparation. Cooking at altitude is a slow process. Water boils at lower temperatures as air pressure decreases, making it difficult to cook foods that require sustained high heat. The climbers adapt, choosing foods that can be prepared with the available equipment and conditions. The evenings in camp, when the day's work is done and the climbers gather in their tents, have their own particular quality. There is conversation, though not always much. The fatigue of altitude often reduces the desire for talk. There is the ritual of preparing for sleep, arranging gear, adjusting clothing, positioning within the sleeping bag for maximum warmth. And there is the awareness, always present, of the mountain outside, the vast frozen landscape that extends in every direction, indifferent to the small human presence within it. The lantern light that glows through tent fabric in these evening hours represents something more than mere illumination. It represents continuity with the world below, with the homes and families that the climbers have left behind. It represents the persistence of human needs in an environment that offers no comfort. And it represents hope, the simple hope that morning will come, that the weather will hold, that the climb will continue. The camps of the Wilcox Expedition progress upward as the days pass. Each new camp is established, occupied, and eventually left behind as the expedition moves toward its higher objectives. The lower camps remain in place, marked by cached supplies and abandoned equipment, waypoints for the descent that will eventually be necessary. The upper camps are more exposed, more demanding, more essential to the success of the summit attempt. At each elevation, the challenges increase. The air grows thinner, making every exertion more difficult. The temperature drops, making the maintenance of warmth more critical. The weather becomes more variable, more dangerous, more demanding of attention and caution. And the camps, these small shelters of fabric and human determination, become more precious, fragile havens in an environment that offers no natural refuge. Each camp becomes a small home, a shelter built of nylon and intention against the endless white. In the summer of 1967, the technology of communication is simpler than what we know today. There are no satellites circling the Earth to relay signals from the mountain to the world below. There are no cellular networks, no digital connections, no instant access to weather forecasts or emergency services. The climbers on Denali carry radio equipment that is heavy, battery-dependent, and limited in its capabilities, but it is their lifeline to the outside world. The radios used by the Wilcox Expedition operate on frequencies designated for park communications. Twice each day, at scheduled times, the expedition attempts to make contact with the ranger station below. These check-ins serve multiple purposes. They allow the rangers to track the expedition's progress. They provide an opportunity for weather information to be relayed to the climbers, and they create a record of the expedition's location and status. The voice of the radio, crackling through static, becomes a familiar presence in the camps. It is a reminder that others are aware of the expedition's progress, that help exists even if it cannot be quickly summoned, that the isolation of the mountain is not absolute. The climbers gather around the radio during the scheduled contact times, listening for the faint voices that carry news from below. Weather forecasting in 1967 is limited by the available technology. Satellite imagery is in its early stages, and the comprehensive data networks that modern forecasters rely upon do not yet exist. The predictions that rangers can offer are based on surface observations, atmospheric readings, and the pattern recognition that comes from experience with the local climate. These predictions are useful but imperfect, capable of identifying general trends, but not of pinpointing specific events. The reports that reach the Wilcox Expedition speak of typical summer conditions with the possibility of unsettled weather. This is not unusual. The mountain is known for its unpredictable weather, its sudden storms, its dramatic shifts from calm to chaos. The climbers absorb this information, factor it into their planning, and continue their ascent. They are aware of the risks, as all mountaineers must be, but awareness is not the same as foreknowledge. The rangers who monitor the expedition's progress maintain their records in logbooks and reports that will later be examined in detail. They note the radio contacts, the positions reported by the climbers, the weather observations that accumulate day by day. They do their jobs professionally, providing what support they can from their position below, but they cannot control the mountain or the weather or the decisions that the climbers make. The limits of communication become more apparent as the expedition moves higher. The radio signals must travel through increasingly hostile conditions, subject to interference from terrain and weather. Some contacts are clear and extended, others are fragmentary, consisting of broken phrases and uncertain confirmations. The climbers learn to work within these limitations, conveying essential information in the brief windows when communication is possible. There is something poignant about these voices crossing the snow, the human impulse to connect, to share, to maintain the bonds of community even in the most isolated circumstances. The rangers below and the climbers above are linked by these fragile threads of radio waves, these intermittent contacts that bridge the distance between the frozen heights and the relative comfort of the lowlands. As the expedition establishes its higher camps, the quality of radio communication varies. Some locations offer better reception than others, depending on terrain and atmospheric conditions. The climbers learn which spots are favorable for radio work, positioning themselves carefully during the scheduled contact times to maximize the chances of successful communication. The information that flows through these radio contacts includes weather updates, expedition status reports, and coordination of logistics. It does not include detailed forecasts of the storm that is gathering beyond the horizon, because such forecasts are not possible with the technology of the era. The system works within its limitations, providing what it can, but it cannot provide what does not exist. Through the static, voices carry fragile threads connecting the mountain's height to the world below. The human body is not designed for high altitude. At sea level, the air contains sufficient oxygen to support all the demands of normal activity. But as elevation increases, the air thins, and with each 1,000 feet of altitude gained, the percentage of oxygen available to the lungs decreases. The body must adapt to this scarcity, or it will fail. The process of adaptation is called acclimatization. It is not a single event but a gradual adjustment that occurs over days and weeks of exposure to altitude. The body responds to reduced oxygen by producing more red blood cells, by increasing the rate of breathing, by making subtle changes to the chemistry of the blood. These adaptations take time, and they cannot be rushed without inviting the serious consequences of altitude sickness. The Wilcox Expedition follows the climbing principle of climb high, sleep low. This approach involves ascending to higher elevations during the day, allowing the body to experience the stress of altitude, then descending to sleep at lower elevations where recovery is easier. Over time, the body adjusts, and the climbers are able to sleep at elevations that would previously have been problematic. The physical sensations of altitude are distinctive. Climbers often report headaches, particularly during the first days at a new elevation. Breathing becomes more labored, even for simple tasks. Sleep is disrupted, marked by irregular breathing patterns that can wake the sleeper repeatedly throughout the night. Appetite often decreases, even as the body's caloric needs increase due to the cold and exertion. For the members of the expedition, these sensations become the background of daily life. They learn to pace themselves, to conserve energy for the essential tasks, to rest when rest is needed. They learn to read their own bodies, recognizing the signs that indicate successful adaptation and the warning signs that suggest problems developing. The load carrying that occupies much of their time is both a necessity and an acclimatization exercise. Each trip up the mountain with a heavy pack stresses the body, pushing it to adapt to the demands of the environment. The climbers become stronger as the days pass, more capable of sustained effort at altitude, more efficient in their movement and breathing. The views from the upper glacier are spectacular, though the climbers may not always have the energy to appreciate them. The Alaska Range extends in every direction, a sea of peaks and ridges that seems to go on forever. The sky at altitude has a deeper blue than at lower elevations, the color of reduced atmosphere and crystalline air, and the mountain itself reveals its upper architecture as the climbers gain height. The ridges and faces, the hanging glaciers and rocky outcrops, the summit that waits above. The days develop a rhythm: wake, eat, pack, climb, rest, descend, eat, sleep. This rhythm is the framework within which the expedition operates, the pattern that carries them upward through the levels of the mountain. It is a rhythm imposed by the environment, by the logistics of the climb, by the needs of the human body. And within this rhythm, the individual experiences of the climbers unfold, moments of satisfaction and frustration, of connection and solitude, of hope and doubt. The breathing at altitude requires conscious attention at first. Climbers learn to breathe more deeply and more frequently than feels natural, forcing air into lungs that seem reluctant to accept it. Over time, this conscious effort becomes automatic, the new breathing pattern integrating itself into the body's rhythms. But the effort is always there, a constant reminder that the environment is not welcoming. As the expedition approaches the higher camps, the cumulative effects of altitude and exertion become more apparent. Climbers move more slowly. Decisions require more consideration. The margin for error narrows as the stakes increase. The mountain does not become easier with familiarity. It becomes more demanding, requiring more of the climbers at every stage. The teamwork that the expedition requires becomes more essential as conditions become more severe. Climbers must rely on each other for safety, for morale, for the practical necessities of life at altitude. The bonds formed in these circumstances are distinctive, forged in shared hardship and mutual dependence. Whatever differences may exist among the members of the group, they are united by their common purpose and their common vulnerability. The mountain teaches patience, one breath, one step, one day at a time toward the waiting summit. At 17,900 feet, the expedition establishes Camp VI, the high camp from which the summit attempt will be launched. This is the staging point, the final platform before the climb to the top. The air here is thin. The temperature is cold even in July, and the weather that has been a concern throughout the expedition is now an immediate and pressing factor. The view from high camp is both beautiful and intimidating. The summit of Denali rises another 2,400 feet above, visible on clear days as a white dome against the blue-black sky. The route to the top follows a series of ridges and snow fields, negotiating terrain that becomes steeper and more exposed as it approaches the peak. From this vantage point, the climbers can trace the path they will follow when conditions permit. The establishment of high camp is a significant achievement. It represents weeks of effort, miles of glacier travel, thousands of feet of elevation gain. The climbers who reach this point have demonstrated their ability to function at altitude, to work as a team, to manage the logistical challenges of the expedition. They are, by any reasonable measure, close to their goal. But proximity to the goal does not guarantee success. The final push to the summit is the most demanding part of the climb. It requires a window of acceptable weather, a reserve of physical strength, and the judgment to recognize when conditions are favorable and when they are not. Many expeditions have reached this point only to be turned back by circumstances beyond their control. The expedition divides into summit groups at high camp. The decision about who will attempt the summit first is based on factors including strength, acclimatization, and the capacity of the camp to support multiple attempts. 7 climbers are designated for the first summit party: Jerry Clark, Dennis Luchterhand, Mark McLaughlin, John Russell, Walt Taylor, Steve Taylor, and Anshel Skiff. They will depart when conditions permit, leaving the others at high camp to follow if the weather holds. When we stand on the threshold of our dreams, how do we know whether to step forward into the unknown or to wait for a safer moment that may never come? The remaining climbers, Wilcox, Snyder, Schlichter, Lewis, and one other, will stay at high camp, resting and preparing for their own summit attempt. This division is practical, designed to maximize the chances of success while distributing the workload of the final push. It is also, as it turns out, a division that will have consequences no one can foresee. The wait at high camp is its own kind of challenge. The climbers must maintain their strength and morale while conserving resources. They must monitor the weather, making judgments about when conditions will be suitable for the summit attempt. They must prepare their equipment, ensuring that everything necessary for the final push is in order, and they must manage the psychological demands of waiting at the edge of their goal. The lanterns at high camp glow through the tent fabric as evening comes. Inside, the climbers share meals and conversation, reviewing the route, discussing the conditions, speculating about the weather. Outside, the mountain extends in every direction, white and cold and patient. The summit waits above, tantalizingly close, separated from the climbers by a few thousand vertical feet and the unpredictable moods of the atmosphere. The bonds among the 7 who will make the first summit attempt are strong. They have traveled together, worked together, suffered together through the weeks of the expedition. They trust each other with their lives, as all roped climbing teams must. And they share a common hope that the weather will hold, that their strength will be sufficient, that they will stand together on the highest point in North America. As the night deepens at high camp, the climbers prepare for the morning that will bring their summit attempt. Equipment is checked. Clothing is arranged for quick dressing. The alarm is set for the early hour of departure, and outside in the darkness of the Arctic summer night, a darkness that is never quite complete, the mountain waits. At this height, the world below becomes a memory, soft and distant, held in the haze of altitude. The barometer is a simple instrument, but it speaks volumes to those who know how to listen. In the ranger station below the mountain, the mercury in the barometer has been falling for several hours. This decline in atmospheric pressure is the signature of an approaching weather system, a signal that the stable conditions of recent days are about to change. Weather on Denali is never entirely predictable, but certain patterns recur with enough frequency to be recognized. Low-pressure systems moving in from the Gulf of Alaska or the Bering Sea can bring extended periods of storm conditions to the Alaska Range. These storms are characterized by high winds, heavy snowfall, and temperatures that drop far below seasonal norms. They can last for hours or for days, and they can make the upper mountain essentially unlivable. The system approaching in mid-July 1967 is unusually powerful. Its origins lie in the complex interactions of air masses over the North Pacific, but its effects will be felt most intensely on the high peaks of the Alaska Range. The rangers observe the falling barometer and note their concern in their logs, but the tools available to them cannot provide the detailed forecasts that would allow for precise warnings. On the mountain, the climbers have their own ways of reading the weather. They observe the clouds, the wind direction, the quality of the light. They note the barometric pressure on their own instruments, those who carry them. They draw on their experience, limited though it may be, to make judgments about the conditions they are likely to encounter. But experience is most valuable when it encounters familiar situations, and the weather that is developing is not familiar. The signs that precede the storm are subtle at first. A slight increase in cloud cover, a shift in the wind direction, a feeling of heaviness in the air that experienced mountaineers sometimes describe but cannot quite explain. These signs are present in the hours before the storm arrives, but they are easily overlooked or misinterpreted by climbers focused on their summit objectives. The communication that might have provided more detailed warnings is limited by the technology of the era. The radio contacts between the expedition and the rangers continue, but they convey only general observations. The urgency that hindsight might suggest is absent from these transmissions. No one knows yet what is coming. The climbers proceed with their preparations. The rangers continue their observations, and the storm continues its approach. The science of weather forecasting has advanced enormously since 1967. Modern climbers have access to satellite imagery, numerical weather models, and communication systems that can relay detailed forecasts to the most remote locations. But in the summer of '67, these tools do not exist. The climbers on Denali make their decisions based on what they can observe directly, supplemented by the limited information that the radio contacts provide. The barometer continues its fall. The mercury drops steadily, hour after hour, marking the approach of conditions that will test the limits of human endurance. The climbers at high camp preparing for their summit attempt cannot know the full significance of this pressure drop. They are aware that weather is always a concern, but they are also aware that they have come far and invested much. The summit is close, and the temptation to proceed is strong. The decision to attempt the summit is not made frivolously. The climbers weigh the factors available to them: their own condition, their equipment, the appearance of the sky, the conditions on the route. They make the best judgment they can with the information they have. And in the morning, when conditions appear acceptable, 7 of them set out for the summit of Denali. The instruments speak their quiet warnings, numbers falling like whispers no one yet fully hears. The morning of July 17th arrives at high camp with conditions that seem acceptable for a summit attempt. The sky is not entirely clear, but neither is it threatening. The wind is present but manageable. The temperature is cold, as it always is at this elevation, but not prohibitively so. The 7 climbers of the first summit party prepare to depart. The process of leaving high camp for a summit attempt is methodical. Climbers dress in their warmest clothing, layer upon layer of insulation, designed to protect against the cold of the upper mountain. They check their equipment: ice axes, crampons, ropes, emergency supplies. They consume what food and drink they can, knowing that nutrition will be difficult to maintain during the long hours ahead. And they step out of the relative shelter of the camp into the open environment of the mountain. The route from high camp to the summit follows a series of features that have been scouted and discussed. The climbers know, at least in general terms, the path they will follow: up through the snow fields, along the ridges, through the final steepening toward the summit dome. The total distance is not great by the standards of lower elevation hiking, but at this altitude, every step requires effort. The 7 climbers move upward as a group, roped together for safety, packing themselves against the demands of the altitude. Their progress is visible from high camp for a time, small figures against the white expanse, making their way toward the summit that rises above. As they climb higher, they pass through the levels of the mountain, each one colder and more exposed than the last. The atmospheric conditions that morning are deceptive. The apparent calm conceals the approach of the storm system that the barometer has been signaling. The climbers, focused on their objective, proceed with the hope that conditions will hold long enough for them to reach the summit and return. It is a reasonable hope, based on the information available to them, but it is a hope that the weather will not fulfill. The views from the upper mountain are expansive, encompassing hundreds of miles of Alaska Range peaks and the lowlands beyond. On a clear day, climbers at these elevations can see far enough to make out the curve of the Earth on the distant horizon. But clarity is variable, subject to the movements of clouds and the accumulation of moisture in the air. The views that greet the 7 climbers are intermittent, revealing and concealing the landscape by turns. The progress of the summit party is steady but slow. At these elevations, even the strongest climbers can manage only a fraction of the pace they would maintain at sea level. The thin air demands more breaths per step, more rest per hour, more patience per mile. The summit seems to approach with agonizing slowness, a goal that remains always in sight but never quite within reach. The climbers who remain at high camp, Wilcox, Snyder, and the others, watch the progress of the summit party as long as visibility permits. They are both supportive and anxious, aware that their own turn will come soon, hopeful that their teammates will succeed. The waiting that they do is its own kind of work, demanding patience and trust. As the morning progresses, the first signs of changing weather begin to appear. The clouds that have been lingering on the horizon start to move closer. The wind picks up slightly, carrying with it a hint of the conditions that are developing. These changes are gradual, easy to overlook or explain away, but they are the advance signals of what is coming. The summit party continues its ascent. Whether they notice the changing conditions, whether they discuss turning back, whether they believe they can outrun the approaching storm, these questions cannot be answered with certainty. What is known is that they continue upward toward the summit of Denali, into the hours when the storm will arrive. They walk into the morning light, 7 figures growing smaller against the mountain's rising face. The storm arrives with a totality that is difficult to convey in words. Within hours, the conditions on the upper mountain transform from challenging to catastrophic. The wind increases to speeds that make standing difficult and movement nearly impossible. The snow comes not as gentle flakes but as driven particles, propelled by the wind with enough force to sting exposed skin. And the visibility vanishes, replaced by a whiteness that has no depth, no direction, no relief. This condition is known among mountaineers as a whiteout. In a whiteout, the snow on the ground blends seamlessly with the snow in the air and the clouds above. There is no horizon, no shadow, no way to tell where the sky ends and the surface begins. A climber in a whiteout may step off a cliff without seeing it, may walk in circles without knowing it, may lose all sense of direction in an environment that offers no reference points. The temperature within the storm drops to levels that challenge even the best equipment of the era. Wind chill, the combined effect of low temperature and high wind, pushes the effective temperature far below what the thermometer alone would indicate. At these wind chill values, exposed flesh can begin to freeze within minutes. The body's core temperature becomes vulnerable, the heat draining away faster than the metabolism can replace it. The 7 climbers of the summit party are somewhere on the upper mountain when the full force of the storm arrives. Their exact location, their exact circumstances, their exact experiences, these details remain uncertain, reconstructed only partially from the evidence that was later discovered. What is certain is that they face conditions beyond what they have prepared for, beyond what their equipment can fully resist, beyond what the human body can tolerate for extended periods. The natural response to such conditions is to seek shelter. But on the upper slopes of Denali, shelter is not a natural feature. There are no caves, no overhanging rocks, no trees to break the wind. The climbers carry what shelter they can, emergency bivouac gear, perhaps a small tent, but deploying such equipment in extreme wind is itself a dangerous challenge. The wind can tear fabric, scatter supplies, make the simplest actions nearly impossible. The duration of the storm extends beyond what anyone on the mountain might have expected. Rather than passing through in a few hours, the system settles over the Alaska Range, maintaining its intensity day after day. The climbers at high camp, those who did not go for the summit, are themselves besieged. They hunker in their tents as the wind screams around them, listening to the fabric strain against its anchors, unable to move, unable to help, unable to do anything but wait and hope. In the face of forces we cannot control, What remains in our power? And how do we find courage when the world itself seems to turn against us? The radio communications that have linked the expedition to the world below become sporadic, then silent. The conditions interfere with transmission, making contact impossible during the height of the storm. The rangers below know that a major weather event is occurring on the mountain, but they cannot reach the climbers, cannot assess their situation, cannot provide assistance. They can only wait as everyone waits for the storm to pass. The snow accumulates with remarkable speed. The camps are buried, the trails obliterated, the landscape transformed into something unrecognizable. The anchors that held tents in place strain under the weight of new snow. The spaces that were carved for shelter fill and fill again, requiring constant effort to maintain. Inside the remaining tents at High Camp, the climbers do what they can to survive. They melt snow for water, a process that becomes increasingly difficult as the storm continues. They share body heat, huddling together against the cold that presses in from every direction. They manage their food supplies, not knowing how long they will be trapped, not knowing when relief might come. And somewhere above them, in the white room of the storm, 7 of their companions are lost. No radio contact reaches them. No voice carries through the wind. The mountain has closed around them, wrapping them in cold and snow, and a silence that will not be broken. In the white room of the storm, all directions dissolve. There is only the wind, the cold, and the waiting. The climbers who remain at High Camp experience their own ordeal. They are alive, sheltered in their tents, but they are also trapped. The storm that has engulfed the summit party engulfs them too, pinning them in place, making movement impossible, stretching the hours into what feels like an endless present. The tents shake and strain in the wind. The fabric that separates inside from outside seems suddenly thin, fragile, inadequate to the forces arrayed against it. The climbers brace against the walls, sometimes holding the fabric up manually when the wind threatens to collapse the structure. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the sound and fury of the storm, by the need to attend to the shelter, by the cold that never quite relents. The radio attempts that the trapped climbers make yield little result. They call into the static, repeating their messages, hopping for acknowledgement from below. Sometimes a faint response comes through, a voice barely audible through the interference, words broken and incomplete. Other times there is only the empty hiss of dead air, the frequencies carrying nothing but the storm's electromagnetic noise. The uncertainty about the summit party weighs heavily on those who wait. They have no information, no contact, no way of knowing what has happened to their 7 companions. The mind, left without data, generates its own scenarios. Perhaps they reached the summit and are descending. Perhaps they found shelter and are waiting out the storm. Perhaps they are even now approaching the camp, invisible in the whiteout until they stumble upon the tents. These hopes sustain the waiting, but they are hopes without foundation. The provisions at High Camp, calculated for a summit attempt and a reasonably prompt descent, become a concern as the storm continues. Food supplies are limited. Fuel for melting snow is finite. The margin of safety that existed when the expedition began the final push is eroding with each passing day. The climbers ration carefully, conserving what they can, but they are aware that the mathematics of survival are not in their favor if the storm continues indefinitely. The physical sensations of the trapped climbers are a catalog of misery. The cold reaches into everything, making fingers clumsy and feet numb despite the best efforts at warmth. The altitude continues its assault, the thin air demanding effort even for rest. Dehydration threatens despite the constant work of melting snow. And above all, there is the psychological weight of helplessness, of waiting for a resolution that may or may not come. The lantern light that flickers in the tents is a small comfort in the darkness of the storm. The lanterns represent fuel that might be needed later, but their light provides a psychological benefit that justifies their use. In the glow of the lanterns, the climbers can see each other's faces, can maintain the human connection that is essential to morale. The light holds back the darkness, even if it cannot hold back the cold. The hours pass in a rhythm dictated by the storm. There is no distinction between day and night. The light outside the tent is the same gray-white at all hours, varying only in intensity. The climbers mark time by radio schedules, by meal times, by the intervals of sleep and waking that the conditions allow. Time becomes elastic, stretching and compressing according to the demands of the moment. And through it all, the question hangs in the air, unspoken but unavoidable. What has happened to the seven? The silence from above is complete. The storm shows no sign of relenting, and the climbers at high camp can do nothing but wait, tending their small shelter, conserving their small supplies, hopping for a break in the weather that will allow them to act. Below the storm's fury, they wait, each hour a small eternity measured in the language of wind. The silence that settles over the radio frequencies is more eloquent than any words could be. It speaks of distances too great to bridge, of conditions too severe to penetrate, of a separation that is becoming more final with each passing hour. The climbers at high camp continue their attempts at contact, but the responses they seek do not come. The seven who went for the summit have vanished into the white silence of the upper mountain. Days pass within the storm. The calendar, if anyone were keeping careful track, would show the progression. July 18th, 19th, 20th. But inside the tents at high camp, time has lost its ordinary meaning. There is only the immediate present, the wind outside, the cold pressing in, the small tasks of survival that occupy each hour. The future has contracted to a single hope, that the storm will end, that movement will become possible, that answers will emerge from the silence. The psychological weight of uncertainty is a burden that grows heavier with time. The human mind is not designed for prolonged ambiguity. It seeks resolution, explanation, closure. But none of these is available to the waiting climbers. They can imagine scenarios, construct possibilities, hope for outcomes, but they cannot know. The not knowing is its own kind of suffering, a companion to the physical hardships that the storm imposes. The supplies at high camp continue their slow depletion. Each meal consumed, each pot of snow melted, each hour of fuel burned represents a subtraction from the margin of survival. The climbers are acutely aware of this calculus, monitoring their remaining resources with careful attention. They know that at some point, regardless of the weather, they will need to descend. The mountain will not support them indefinitely. The radio contacts with the ranger station below, when they are possible, carry an increasing tone of concern. The rangers have been tracking the storm, observing its unusual duration and intensity. They are aware that the Wilcox Expedition is high on the mountain, that contact has been sporadic, that something may be wrong. But they too are limited in what they can do. The weather that traps the climbers also prevents rescue. The mountain is its own world, sealed off from intervention. The conversations among the trapped climbers are muted, practical, focused on the immediate necessities. There is discussion of rationing, of weather observations, of the condition of the tents and equipment. But beneath these practical exchanges lies a deeper current of feeling, fear, grief, hope, denial, that surfaces only in fragments. The emotional weight of what may have happened is too heavy to confront directly, so it is carried silently, a burden shared but not spoken. The lantern light continues its vigil through the hours of storm. The small flames flicker and glow, casting shadows on the tent walls, providing the only variation in a world that has become monotonously hostile. The climbers tend the lanterns as they tend the stoves, maintaining these small sources of warmth and light against the vast cold darkness outside. The lanterns become symbols of hope, of persistence, of the human refusal to surrender to circumstances. Sleep, when it comes, is troubled and incomplete. The howl of the wind intrudes on every rest, pulling the sleepers back to awareness. The cold finds its way through every layer, demanding attention, preventing the deep unconsciousness that the body craves. And in the half-sleep that is possible, dreams come, dreams of warmth, of home, of the 7 companions whose fate remains unknown. The silence from the summit party is now days old. Whatever has happened on the upper mountain, it has happened beyond the reach of communication, beyond the possibility of intervention. The climbers at high camp begin to face a reality that they have been resisting, the probability that their companions are not going to return. This recognition does not come as a single moment of revelation, but as a gradual accumulation of evidence. The duration of the silence, the severity of the conditions, the limits of human endurance. And yet hope persists. The human capacity for hope is remarkable, sustaining itself on the smallest possibilities. Perhaps the 7 found shelter. Perhaps they dug in and are waiting. Perhaps they will appear when the storm breaks, exhausted but alive. These hopes have no evidence to support them, but they require no evidence. They are sustained by the simple refusal to accept the worst until the worst is confirmed beyond doubt. Silence settles over the frequencies, a silence that grows heavier with each passing hour. In the ranger station at the base of the mountain, the accumulating hours of silence and storm are generating a deepening concern. The rangers have dealt with difficult situations before. The mountain is not forgiving, and those who climb it sometimes require assistance. But the current situation has a quality that sets it apart. The duration of the storm, the loss of contact, the number of climbers potentially affected, all of these factors combine to create an urgency that demands response. The process of organizing a mountain rescue in 1967 is neither simple nor quick. There are no dedicated rescue teams standing by, no helicopters equipped for high-altitude operations, no established protocols for rapid deployment. Rescue on Denali is an improvised affair. drawing on whatever resources can be assembled from the climbing community, the Park Service, and the military. Coordination is done by radio and telephone, with all the delays and complications that these technologies entail. The first step is to confirm that a rescue is necessary. The Rangers attempt to reach the expedition by radio, trying different frequencies and times, hopping for a response that will clarify the situation. When these attempts fail, the concern deepens. The storm itself prevents any aerial reconnaissance. The clouds and winds that blanket the mountain make flight impossible. The Rangers can only wait as the climbers are waiting for the weather to relent. Other climbing parties on the mountain become potential sources of information. There are other expeditions in the Alaska Range during this summer season, and some of them may have observations or contacts that could shed light on the situation. The Rangers reach out through whatever channels are available, seeking any data that might help them understand what has happened on the upper mountain. The news of the potential emergency begins to spread beyond the immediate circle of rangers and climbers. Park administrators are notified. Contacts are made with military installations that might be able to provide helicopter support once conditions permit. The machinery of response begins to turn, slowly at first, but with increasing momentum as the seriousness of the situation becomes clear. The families of the expedition members remain, for now, unaware of the developing crisis. In the 1960s, communication with remote expeditions is expected to be intermittent, and periods of silence do not automatically trigger alarm. The families wait for news, as families of climbers always wait, trusting that their sons, husbands, and brothers are making their way up the mountain as planned. The calls that will shatter this trust have not yet been made. The weather forecasts, such as they are, offer little immediate hope. The system that has settled over the Alaska Range shows no sign of rapid departure. The meteorologists can identify the pattern, can explain the dynamics that are keeping the storm in place, but they cannot hasten its end. The mountain remains locked in cloud and wind, inaccessible to those who would help. The Rangers maintain their watch, monitoring the radio frequencies, observing the weather, preparing for action when action becomes possible. Their logs from these days record the attempts at contact, the weather observations, the growing list of concerns. These logs will later become important documents, examined and re-examined by those seeking to understand what happened and whether different actions might have changed the outcome. The warm rooms of the ranger station, lit by electric light and heated against the Alaskan chill, stand in stark contrast to the conditions on the mountain. Here, coffee is available, food is plentiful, the cold is kept at bay. But the Rangers feel the weight of the contrast, the awareness that fellow human beings are suffering in conditions they cannot reach. The comfort of the station becomes a source of guilt as much as relief. The hours pass. The storm continues, and somewhere above, on the frozen slopes of Denali, 12 climbers are fighting for survival or have already lost that fight. The Rangers do not know which. They can only prepare and wait and hope that when the weather finally breaks, they will find more than silence on the upper mountain. Below, in warm rooms lit by electric light, others begin to understand that something has gone wrong. When the storm finally weakens, the search begins. The clouds that have shrouded the mountain for days begin to lift, revealing glimpses of the upper slopes. The winds, though still present, diminish enough to make helicopter flight possible. And the men who have been waiting, rangers, fellow climbers, military personnel, move into action with the urgency that the situation demands. The first aerial reconnaissance reveals the scale of what the storm has done. The mountain is transformed, its features buried under fresh snow, its camps invisible beneath the accumulation. The searchers peer through aircraft windows, scanning the white expanse for any sign of the missing climbers. They look for tents, for tracks, for the bright colors of climbing gear against the snow. At first, they see nothing. The climbers who survived at high camp have begun their descent, making their way down the mountain with the desperate energy of those who have been too long in the death zone. Their condition is poor, frostbitten, exhausted, traumatized by days of helpless waiting. But they are alive, and their survival means that some of the expedition has been preserved. The searchers who meet them learn what little the survivors can tell. The summit party departed, the storm arrived, contact was lost. Beyond that, there is only silence. The search of the upper mountain is hampered by the conditions that the storm has left behind. The new snow is deep and unstable, creating avalanche hazards on the steep slopes. The altitude limits the endurance of searchers, who must pace themselves against the thin air. And the scale of the terrain is immense. Thousands of vertical feet, miles of glacier and ridge, an area that could conceal a dozen climbers in its vastness. The searchers find evidence. A tent, partially collapsed under the weight of snow, pieces of equipment scattered by the wind, the small signs of human presence that mark a campsite, now transformed by the storm into something unrecognizable. Each discovery brings both hope and dread. Hope that more will be found, dread of what the final accounting might reveal. The first recovery of remains comes with a mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the loss confirmed, relief that at least some answer has been provided. The searchers handle what they find with the respect and care that the circumstances require. They are not strangers to death. Anyone who spends time in the high mountains knows that death is a possibility. But the scale of this tragedy, the number of lives lost, gives the work a particular weight. The search continues over multiple days as weather permits. Some of the 7 are found, others remain hidden, their locations unknown, their final moments unrecorded. The mountain does not yield all its secrets. The snow that buried the climbers will eventually become ice, will eventually flow downward with the glacier's slow movement, will eventually release what it holds. But that process takes decades, and for now, the mountain keeps what it has taken. The helicopters that ferry searchers to and from the mountain become a regular presence in the skis above McKinley National Park. Their sounds, the thwap of rotors, the whine of engines, are the sounds of hope and sorrow intermingled. Each flight carries the possibility of discovery, and each discovery carries the weight of loss confirmed. The surviving climbers, now safely below, provide what information they can. They describe the expedition's progress, the conditions at high camp, the departure of the summit party. They answer questions, submit to interviews, contribute to the understanding of what happened. But there are limits to what they know. They were not with the summit party when the storm arrived. They cannot speak to the final hours of their companions. The search, when it finally concludes, has recovered some of the missing climbers, but not all. The final count confirms what the silence had suggested. 7 members of the Wilcox Expedition have perished on the upper slopes of Denali. It is the worst disaster in the mountain's climbing history, a tragedy that will be remembered and studied for decades to come. The lanterns that the searchers carry during the evening hours of their work cast the same amber glow that the climbers' lanterns cast during the storm. Light against darkness, warmth against cold, the human presence asserting itself in an environment that offers no comfort. The searchers carry these lights as a kind of tribute, a way of honoring those they seek, a reminder that the search is fundamentally an act of love. They search as humans have always searched, with hope, with dread, with lanterns held against the dark. The mountain reveals its secrets slowly, reluctantly, incompletely. What the searchers find on the upper slopes of Denali tells a story, but it is a story with gaps, a narrative that must be reconstructed from fragments and inference. The full truth of what happened to the 7 climbers of the summit party during the storm of July 1967 will never be entirely known. The evidence suggests that the storm overtook the summit party either during their ascent or during their attempted descent. The violence of the weather, the wind, the cold, the whiteout conditions, would have made movement extremely difficult and survival without adequate shelter nearly impossible. The climbers may have tried to dig in, to create emergency shelter in the snow. They may have tried to descend, losing their way in the featureless white. They may have become separated, each struggling alone against conditions that no one could survive for long. The equipment found on the mountain shows the marks of the storm, tents torn by wind, gear scattered across the snow, the small possessions of the climbers, personal items, photographs, letters discovered in the wreckage of camps. These objects, mundane in ordinary circumstances, become charged with meaning in the context of what has happened. They are the last physical traces of lives that have ended, the final material connection to those who are gone. The bodies that are recovered show the effects of exposure and cold. The mountain's temperatures, combined with the wind, would have overwhelmed the body's ability to maintain warmth. Hypothermia, the progressive cooling of the body's core, would have set in, bringing with it the characteristic confusion, lethargy, and eventual unconsciousness that precede death from cold. This process, while not painless, is generally considered to be less traumatic than many other causes of death. There is some small comfort in this. The climbers who are not found remain on the mountain, their locations unknown. Perhaps they are buried deep in snow that has become ice. Perhaps they fell into crevasses hidden by the storm. Perhaps they lie in places that the searchers could not reach, could not see, could not access in the difficult conditions of the high search. The mountain keeps these dead as it has kept other dead throughout its history. They become part of the mountain's geography, resting in the place they sought to conquer. The reconstruction of the timeline is partial at best. The summit party departed on the morning of July 17th. The storm arrived sometime on that day or the next. Radio contact was lost. The 7 did not return. Beyond these facts, the details remain uncertain. The order of events, the decisions made by the climbers, the precise circumstances of each death, these cannot be determined from the available evidence. The survivors carry their own knowledge, incomplete as it is. They know the seven as they were before the summit attempt, their personalities, their strengths, their hopes. They know the conditions at high camp, the discussions about weather, the plans for the summit push. But they do not know what happened after the departure, what choices were made as the storm closed in, what words were spoken in the final hours. These secrets belong to the dead. The mountain, indifferent as always, continues its existence. The storms pass, the snows fall, the glaciers flow. The tragedy of July 1967 is absorbed into the mountain's history, one chapter among many. The peak does not mourn, it does not remember, it simply is. And yet, for those who climb after, the mountain carries the weight of what has happened. The roots bear the memory of those who have passed before, the successful and the lost alike. The closure that the search provides is incomplete but necessary. The families of the missing receive what answers can be given. The climbing community absorbs the lessons that the tragedy offers, and the mountain returns to its waiting silence, holding its dead in the cold embrace of ice and stone. The mountain holds its secrets in ice and stone, offering only fragments of an incomplete story. The news travels outward from Alaska in the days following the disaster. It moves through official channels, Park Service communications, military reports, government notifications, and through unofficial ones, telephone calls, letters, the quiet spread of word among the climbing community. By the time the newspapers carry the story, many of those most affected already know. The families of the lost climbers receive the news in the way that families have always received such news: a knock on the door, a telephone call, a uniformed visitor with words that change everything. The moment of notification divides time into before and after, creating a wound that will never fully heal. In homes across America, parents learn that their sons will not return. Wives learn that their husbands are gone. The ordinary fabric of life is torn by loss. The newspaper coverage of the disaster reflects the journalistic conventions of the era. Headlines announce the tragedy in stark terms. Articles describe the expedition, the storm, the search. Photographs show the mountain, the climbers, the grief-stricken families. The story receives national attention, becoming one of those events that captures the public imagination and prompts reflection on the nature of risk and loss. The communities from which the climbers came, the small towns and suburban neighborhoods, the colleges and workplaces, experience their own forms of collective grief. Memorial services are held, tributes are spoken. The names of the lost are read aloud, each name representing a life cut short, a future that will not be lived. The communities do what communities have always done in the face of death. They gather, they remember, they mourn. The families face the particular challenge of grieving for those whose bodies have not all been recovered. The mountain still holds some of the dead, and this incomplete return complicates the rituals of mourning. Funerals are held, but some are without caskets. Graves are marked, but some are empty. The families must find ways to honor their dead without the full closure that physical remains would provide. The letters and personal effects that are recovered from the mountain make their way back to the families. These small objects, a photograph, a journal, a piece of jewelry, become precious relics, the last tangible connections to those who are gone. The families receive them with mixed emotions: gratitude for the return, grief at what the return signifies. The objects are kept in special places, brought out on anniversaries and birthdays, touched with the reverence due to sacred things. The survivors of the expedition carry their own burdens. They have returned from the mountain alive, but they have left companions behind. The guilt of survival, irrational but powerful, accompanies them as they return to their normal lives. They must answer questions, relive experiences, explain decisions that may or may not have made a difference. The aftermath of tragedy is its own ordeal. The climbing community, a close-knit world of shared passion and risk, absorbs the loss with particular intensity. These were not strangers who died on Denali. They were fellow climbers, members of the same tribe, pursuers of the same dreams. The community mourns them as its own, recognizing in their fate a possibility that every climber accepts but hopes to avoid. The grief in time becomes less acute. The sharp pain of loss softens into a dull ache, a permanent but manageable presence. The families learn to live with their sorrow, incorporating it into the ongoing business of existence. The anniversaries are observed, the memories are cherished, the names are spoken. But life continues as life must, carrying the weight of the past into an uncertain future. Across the country, in homes now touched by loss, the ordinary rituals of grief begin their slow unfolding. In the months and years following the disaster, questions arise that demand examination. What happened on the upper mountain? Could the tragedy have been prevented? What lessons can be drawn for future expeditions? These questions are asked by officials, by the climbing community, by the families of the lost, by anyone who seeks to make meaning from catastrophe. The official inquiry into the disaster examines the known facts with the care that the subject requires. The expedition's preparation, equipment, and decisions are reviewed. The weather conditions and forecasting capabilities of the era are analyzed. The actions of the Park Service, the rangers, and the rescue teams are assessed. The inquiry seeks not to assign blame but to understand, to identify the factors that contributed to the outcome, and to recommend changes that might prevent similar tragedies. The weather emerges as the central factor in the disaster. The storm that struck the upper mountain was of unusual intensity and duration, exceeding what the climbers or the forecasters anticipated. The system that produced the storm was not predictable with the technology available in 1967. The climbers made their summit attempt based on reasonable assessments of the conditions they could observe, and they were overtaken by a weather event that could not have been foreseen. The question of the expedition's preparation and decision-making is more complex. Some observers suggest that the summit party should not have departed when it did, that warning signs were ignored, that caution should have prevailed over ambition. Others note that the signs were ambiguous, that reasonable climbers could have interpreted them differently, that the decision to go was not unreasonable given the information available. The debate continues without resolution, because the facts support multiple interpretations. The merger of the Wilcox and Colorado groups receives scrutiny. The two groups had different leadership, different dynamics, different approaches to the climb. Some suggest that the combined expedition lacked the cohesion necessary for effective decision-making in crisis. Others note that many successful expeditions have been composed of individuals from different backgrounds, and that group dynamics alone cannot explain what happened. The question of whether a smaller, more unified party would have fared differently cannot be answered. The communication systems of the era are identified as a limitation. Better weather forecasting, more reliable radio contact, improved information flow between the mountain and the support below. All of these might have provided earlier warning of the approaching storm. The inquiries recommend improvements in these areas, and changes are subsequently implemented. Future expeditions will benefit from technology that did not exist in 1967. The nature of high-altitude mountaineering itself is implicated in the tragedy. Climbing at extreme elevation involves inherent risks that cannot be fully eliminated. The weather at such heights is unpredictable. The margin for error is minimal. The consequences of miscalculation are severe. Those who choose to climb accept these risks, but the acceptance of risk does not mean that every loss is inevitable. The balance between risk and precaution is the subject of ongoing reflection. The families of the lost climbers seek answers, but find that answers do not diminish grief. Understanding what happened does not bring back the dead. The questions, however carefully examined, lead to conclusions that are partial and provisional. The full truth of those final hours remains hidden, known only to those who did not survive to tell it. The climbing community absorbs the lessons with characteristic pragmatism. Equipment is improved, protocols are revised, training is enhanced. The next generation of climbers benefits from the experience of those who came before, including the experience of tragedy. The mountain becomes safer, not safe, but safer, as knowledge accumulates and practices evolve. And yet, the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. People continue to climb, accepting the risks that climbing entails. The call of the high places persists, drawing new generations toward the summits that their predecessors sought. The tragedy of 1967 becomes part of the mountain's history, a chapter that informs but does not prevent future attempts. In the aftermath, questions rise like breath in cold air, visible for a moment, then dissolving into silence. Denali stands as it has always stood, indifferent to the human dramas that play out upon its slopes. The mountain does not remember the dead. It does not mourn the lost. It does not learn from tragedy. It simply exists, a fact of geography, a presence in the landscape that predates humanity and will outlast it. And yet, for those who come after, the mountain carries a history that shapes their experience. The years following the 1967 disaster bring changes to the way Denali is climbed. The National Park Service implements new requirements for expeditions, including improved equipment standards, better communication protocols, and more rigorous screening of climbing parties. Weather forecasting improves as technology advances, providing climbers with information that was not available to the Wilcox Expedition. The margin of safety increases, though it can never become absolute. The climbing community develops a culture of memory around the disaster. The names of the seven are spoken with reverence, their story told to new climbers as a cautionary tale and a tribute. The lessons of 1967 are incorporated into training programs and expedition planning. The tragedy becomes a teaching moment, a case study in the risks of high-altitude mountaineering and the importance of prudent decision-making. The mountain continues to draw climbers from around the world. The allure of Denali, its height, its remoteness, its challenge, remains powerful for those who seek to test themselves against extreme environments. Each year, new expeditions set out along the routes that generations of climbers have followed. Some succeed, others turn back. A few, despite all precautions, do not return. The mountain extracts its toll, as mountains always have. The survivors of the Wilcox Expedition live with their memories of that summer. They carry the experience forward into their subsequent lives, shaped by what they witnessed and endured. Some continue to climb, others do not. All remember the companions they lost, the storm that changed everything, the silence that fell over the upper mountain. The experience becomes part of their identity, an indelible mark left by those terrible days. The technology that now supports mountain climbing would be barely recognizable to the climbers of 1967. Satellite communication allows for real-time contact with the outside world. Weather forecasts are more accurate and more accessible. Equipment has been refined through decades of innovation, offering greater protection against the cold and wind. The mountain has not become easy. It will never be easy, but it has become more knowable, more predictable, more survivable. And yet, the mountain retains its power to humble and to harm. Climbers still die on Denali, overcome by weather or accident or the simple limits of human endurance. The improvements in safety have reduced the toll, but they have not eliminated it. The mountain demands respect, and those who fail to offer it may pay with their lives. This fundamental reality connects the climbers of today with those of 1967 and with all who came before. The glaciers that flow down from Denali's heights carry within them the history of the mountain. Somewhere in that ice, the remains of climbers who were never recovered continue their slow journey toward the valleys below. In decades or centuries, the glacier may release what it holds. Until then, the mountain keeps its dead, holding them in the cold silence that has become their final home. The mountain endures as mountains do, unchanged by human sorrow, yet forever changed in human memory. The 12 climbers of the Wilcox Expedition were more than their deaths. They were lives lived with purpose and passion, dreams pursued with courage and determination. To remember them only as victims of a tragedy is to diminish the fullness of their existence. Let us remember them instead as they lived, as sons and husbands, as students and workers, as dreamers and doers, as human beings who reached for something beyond the ordinary. Joseph Wilcox, who organized and led the expedition, brought to the mountain a careful and systematic mind. His vision created the opportunity that brought 11 others to Alaska in the summer of 1967. He survived the disaster and carried its weight for the rest of his life, writing about the experience, answering questions, living with the unanswerable mysteries of those final days. The 7 who did not return, Jerry Clark, Dennis Luchterhand, Mark McLaughlin, John Russell, Walt Taylor, Steve Taylor, and Anshel Skiff, each brought their own gifts and aspirations to the expedition. They were young men at the beginning of their adult lives, with futures that seemed to stretch before them full of possibility. They chose to pursue a challenging goal, accepting the risks that such a pursuit entails, and they met those risks with courage. The families who lost these men have found their own ways of remembering. Some have created memorials, tangible markers of lives that ended too soon. Others have preserved letters and photographs, personal archives that keep the memory alive. Still others have simply lived with the loss, carrying the presence of the absent in the daily rhythms of ongoing life. There is no single way to mourn, no prescribed formula for grief. The climbing community remembers through practice. The lessons of the Wilcox Expedition inform the preparation and conduct of subsequent climbs. Every expedition that benefits from improved safety protocols, every climber who survives a storm because of better equipment or communication, owes a debt to those who went before. The dead teach the living, their sacrifice contributing to the survival of others. Memorial tributes on and near the mountain mark the passage of those who have been lost. These markers, plaques, cairns, simple inscriptions, create points of connection between the present and the past. Climbers who pass these markers pause to read the names, to acknowledge the history, to reflect on the risks they themselves are taking. The memorials become part of the mountain's landscape, permanent features that remind all who see them of what can happen in this place. The passage of time has not erased the memory of the Wilcox Expedition. Books have been written, documentaries produced, articles published. The story continues to be told, passed from generation to generation of climbers and those who are interested in the history of mountaineering. The 7 who died have achieved a kind of immortality, their names preserved in the record of human endeavor. And for those who knew them personally, the families, the friends, the fellow climbers, the memory remains intimate and irreplaceable. No book or documentary can capture the sound of a voice, the warmth of a presence, the particular way a person moved through the world. These memories belong to those who hold them, private treasures that connect the living to the dead. We remember them not for how they were lost, but for how they lived, with courage, with hope, with love. From sorrow, wisdom sometimes emerges. The tragedy of the Wilcox Expedition, for all its grief, has contributed to the body of knowledge that supports safer mountaineering. The lessons written in snow on Denali in July of 1967 continue to inform the practice of those who climb high mountains anywhere in the world. The first lesson concerns weather. The storm that overtook the summit party was powerful but not unprecedented. Similar storms have occurred before and since, and the mountain's capacity to generate extreme weather is now better understood. Modern climbers approach Denali with a heightened awareness of weather risks, consulting forecasts, monitoring conditions, and maintaining flexibility in their plans. The willingness to turn back when conditions deteriorate is recognized as wisdom, not weakness. The second lesson concerns communication. The radio systems that the Wilcox Expedition relied upon were inadequate to the demands of the situation. Today, satellite communication devices allow climbers to receive weather updates, to call for help in emergencies, and to maintain contact with the outside world in ways that were impossible in 1967. These improvements have saved lives and will continue to do so. The third lesson concerns preparation. The equipment and techniques of high-altitude mountaineering have advanced significantly since the 1960s. Clothing is warmer and more weather-resistant. Tents are stronger and lighter. Stoves are more reliable. Every aspect of expedition gear has been refined through decades of experience and innovation. The climbers of today are better equipped to survive the conditions that the Wilcox Expedition encountered. The fourth lesson concerns group dynamics. The management of an expedition, the decision-making processes, the distribution of responsibility, the maintenance of cohesion, is now recognized as a critical factor in success and safety. Training programs emphasize leadership skills, communication within teams, and the importance of clear protocols for difficult decisions. The human element of expedition climbing receives attention alongside the technical elements. The fifth lesson concerns humility. The mountain is always stronger than the climber. No amount of preparation or equipment can guarantee safety in an environment as demanding as the high slopes of Denali. The recognition of this fundamental imbalance, the acceptance of risk coupled with the commitment to minimize it, characterizes the mature approach to mountaineering that the tragedy helped to foster. The changes that have been implemented since 1967 have made Denali safer, but they have not made it safe. Climbers still die on the mountain, and they will continue to die despite all precautions. The lessons of the Wilcox Expedition reduce the toll but do not eliminate it. The mountain remains what it has always been, a place of beauty and danger, of aspiration and risk, of triumph and tragedy. The teaching continues with each new climbing season. Young mountaineers learn the story of the Wilcox Expedition as part of their education. They study the decisions, the conditions, the outcomes. They draw their own conclusions about what they would do in similar circumstances, and they carry this knowledge with them onto the mountain, adding their own experiences to the accumulated wisdom of those who have climbed before. Audience reflection. What do we owe to those who suffered before us, whose lessons we inherit? How do we honor their memory through our own choices and actions? From sorrow, wisdom sometimes grows. Quiet lessons written in snow, passed down through generations. As our journey together nears its end, let us allow the pace to slow, the intensity to soften, the urgency to fade. We have traveled far through this story, from the first dreams of the expedition to the silence that followed the storm, from the homes of 12 climbers to the frozen heights of Denali. Now it is time to rest, to let the narrative settle, to prepare for the gentle closing that awaits. The hour is growing late, whether in the world outside or simply in the space of this story. The energy that carried us through the earlier chapters can now be released. There is nothing more to prove, nothing more to accomplish, nothing more to fear. The story has been told. The names have been spoken. The lessons have been considered. What remains is the quiet aftermath, the space for reflection, the transition toward peace. The mountain, as we leave it, stands in the soft light of evening. The storms have passed. The wind has gentled. The snow lies still and undisturbed across the upper slopes. There is a beauty in this quietness, a serenity that seems almost impossible after the violence of the storm. But mountains have always known this alternation, the fury and the calm, the danger and the peace, the taking and the giving back. The relationship between humans and high places is complex, woven of many threads. There is ambition and there is humility. There is courage and there is caution. There is the desire to test oneself against extreme challenges and the recognition that such tests sometimes extract the ultimate price. Those who climb accept this complexity, holding its contradictions in a single commitment. The story of the Wilcox Expedition is one chapter in a larger book, the ongoing story of human encounter with the wild places of the earth. It is not the first chapter, and it will not be the last. Others have died on Denali before and since. Others have summited in triumph and descended in gratitude. The mountain continues to offer itself as a test, a dream, a destination, and people continue to answer. Let the weight of the story settle now gently like snow falling on a windless night. Let the sorrow and the wonder find their balance. Let the memory of the 12 rest easy, honored in the telling, cherished in the silence that follows. We have done what we came to do. We have remembered. As our journey nears its end, we let the weight of the story settle softly, like evening settling over snow. And so we come to the close of our journey together. We have traced the path of the Wilcox Expedition from its origins in dream and planning, through its long approach to the mountain, up the glaciers and ridges of Denali, into the heart of the storm that changed everything. We have witnessed what can be witnessed, and we have honored what must be honored. The 7 who did not return from the summit attempt of July 1967 deserve to be remembered with respect and gratitude. They were not reckless. They were not foolish. They were climbers who pursued a worthy goal and encountered conditions beyond their control. Their deaths, while tragic, were not meaningless. They contributed to the knowledge that now protects others. They demonstrated the courage that the high places demand. The mountain stands yet as it will stand for ages to come. The glaciers flow. The winds blow. The snows fall and accumulate and compress into ice. The summit waits, patient and indifferent for those who will attempt it in seasons yet to come. And somewhere in the white expanse of the upper mountain, the 7 rest. At peace, we may hope, in the place they sought to conquer. For those who have listened through this long evening, we offer our thanks. You have given your attention to a story that matters, a chapter of history that deserves to be remembered. May the quiet of these final moments accompany you into whatever comes next, whether that is sleep or reflection, or simply the gentle continuation of your own ongoing journey. The lantern light flickers low now. The wind has stilled. The story is complete. And so we close this chapter, carrying these stories gently forward into our own continuing journeys.